This video is not about left versus right. It's about what happens when politics stops being a system of ideas and starts becoming a system of identity. When beliefs become who we are, questioning them feels like an attack on the self. That's where politics begins to resemble a cult. Humans don't just want information. We want certainty. We want belonging. We want meaning. In uncertain times, ideology offers all three. Political movements don't just explain the world, they tell people who they are and who they're against. That clarity feels comforting, even when it's false. Political cults follow familiar patterns. There is a chosen truth, a shared enemy, a moral hierarchy. Loyalty is rewarded, doubt is punished. Complexity becomes betrayal, nuance becomes weakness. Over time, people stop defending ideas and start defending identities. When I say cult, I'm not calling voters stupid. I'm describing a psychological pattern. A cult is any system that rewards certainty over curiosity, loyalty over truth, emotional allegiance over evidence, and it punishes doubt, complexity, independent thinking. That's not just religion. That can be a workplace, a friend group, a fandom, and yes, a political movement. The modern political cult doesn't need a building. It only needs a platform. Because today, belonging is digital. Loyalty is performative. And the leader might not even be a person. It might be the algorithm. Old cults needed a charismatic leader. Modern political cults don't. Because the algorithm selects the leaders for you. It feeds you the content that spikes emotion. Outrage, fear, superiority, disgust, and then it calls that engagement. That's why you can watch one political clip and suddenly your feed becomes a full-time war. This didn't appear overnight. It built in layers. Here are the major accelerators. 1. Cable news becomes a constant emotional feed. Fear, conflict, scandal, all day. 2. Social media turns politics into identity performance. Not just what you believe, but who you are. 3. Polarization becomes measurable. Researchers showed Americans growing more ideologically divided and more negative toward the other side over time. 4. After 2015-2016, politics becomes entertainment and warfare. The internet doesn't just report politics. It turns politics into a storyline. 5. Pandemic-era reality fracture. Everyone lived in different information ecosystems. Different truths, different villains, different heroes. And 6. Loneliness and disconnection. When people feel isolated, they become more vulnerable to groups that promise meaning and certainty, which is exactly what cult dynamics exploit. So the question isn't, why are people acting crazy? The question is, what kind of environment produces this behavior in millions of normal people? Let's break the psychology down into 3 cravings. Craving number 1, certainty. The world is complicated. A cult offers a simple story. Good guys, bad guys. One real truth. Certainty feels like safety. Craving number 2, belonging. Humans would rather be wrong in a group than correct alone. A political cult gives you instant community, shared language, shared enemies, shared insider knowledge. It tells you, you're not just a person, you're part of the awakened. Craving number 3, identity. In modern life, identity is unstable. Work is unstable. Relationships are unstable. Culture is unstable. So people anchor to something stable, a tribe. And once politics becomes your tribe, disagreeing with you doesn't feel like debate. It feels like disrespect. It feels like threat. It feels like attack. That's why conversations feel impossible now. Because we're not debating opinions. We're protecting identities. And identity protection activates the same defensive instincts as survival. That's not politics. That's psychology. Now let's talk about the toolkit, because political cults, on any side, use the same mechanics. Mechanic number 1, enemy creation. You don't just disagree with the other side. You frame them as dangerous, evil, or subhuman. Because if the enemy is evil, you don't need nuance. You only need loyalty. Mechanic number 2, moral permission. Once you believe you're fighting evil, almost anything becomes justified. Lying becomes strategy. Cruelty becomes truth-telling. Corruption becomes necessary. Mechanic number 3, information control. Not always by banning information, but by flooding you with so much outrage that you can't think long enough to verify anything. Mechanic number 4, social reward. You get likes for rage, followers for humiliation, attention for dunking. So even if someone wanted to step back, they can't, because they built their identity, and sometimes their income, on the performance. And mechanic number 5, leader mythology. Some movements revolve around a person. Some revolve around an ideology. Some revolve around grievance. But the feeling is the same. This leader is the only one who tells the truth. This movement is the only one that sees reality. Anyone who criticizes us is an enemy. That's cult structure. If you've ever seen those TikToks that are basically, they don't want you to know this, that's not politics, that's recruitment. Now, let's talk about MAGA specifically. And here's the non-biased way to say this. MAGA didn't succeed because everyone suddenly became hateful. It succeeded because it offered something psychologically powerful, a clear identity, a shared enemy, a storyline where followers are heroes. It spread because it offered something many people were craving, a story where you don't feel powerless. And most importantly, it offered permission to turn politics into personal loyalty. It wasn't just, I support a platform. It became, I support a person. I support a tribe. I support a war. And when a movement becomes warlike, facts stop working. Because facts don't satisfy the deeper need, the need to belong and feel powerful. Now, to be fair, this dynamic exists beyond MAGA. You can find it anywhere politics becomes purity tests, public shaming, ideological policing. Thinking, if you don't agree with us, you're evil. That's why this isn't a left issue or right issue. It's a human issue. And in a fractured society, politics becomes the substitute religion. One of the most misunderstood parts of the MAGA movement is why so many people stay, even when the evidence stacks up against the narrative. From the outside, it looks like denial. From the inside, it feels like survival. Because once a belief system becomes your identity, questioning it doesn't feel like changing your mind. It feels like destroying yourself. For many people, MAGA isn't just a political position. It's their community, their social circle, their sense of moral clarity, their proof that they're not the problem. Leaving would mean admitting, I was wrong. I trusted the wrong people. I built my life around a story that wasn't true. And psychologically, that level of ego death is more painful than staying in a false reality. The brain will often protect identity before it protects truth. So when reality conflicts with the group narrative, the brain doesn't ask, what's accurate? It asks, what keeps me belonging? And the answer is almost always, stay loyal. This is where truth itself becomes dangerous. In cult-like systems, information isn't evaluated on whether it's factual. It's evaluated on whether it's loyal. If a fact supports the group, it's shared endlessly. If it contradicts the group, it's dismissed as fake, corrupt, or malicious. That's not stupidity. That's motivated reasoning. The brain selectively accepting information that protects the self-image. And the longer someone stays in the system, the more extreme the defenses become. Eventually, reality itself gets reclassified as the enemy. At that point, you're no longer asking, is this true? You're asking, who does this truth serve? But there's another layer people rarely talk about. Inside political movements, there's often a cult within the cult, a smaller inner circle where power changes the rules. Many people in politics don't start out planning to be corrupt. They start out wanting influence, recognition, or the ability to make change. But once they're initiated, once they're given access, status, or leverage, the system begins making demands. It starts small. Don't say that yet. Wait until after the vote. We need unity right now. This will hurt the movement if you speak up. And every time they comply, the cost of resistance goes up. Power-based cults don't force people to do bad things all at once. They normalize them in steps. Each compromise becomes the entry fee for staying inside the circle. Eventually, people aren't protecting truth anymore. They're protecting access. At a certain point, leaving the system becomes more dangerous than staying in it. Speaking out risks, losing funding, losing status, being attacked by your own base, being framed as a traitor. So instead of asking, "Is this right?" people start asking, "What's survivable?" That's how you end up with people defending things they privately know are wrong, because the system rewards obedience and punishes integrity. That's not ideology anymore. That's coercion disguised as loyalty. When leaders model this behavior, it teaches followers a powerful lesson. It says, truth is optional. Loyalty is mandatory. And once that lesson spreads, the entire movement becomes reality resistant. Not because everyone is evil, but because everyone is trapped. If you've ever felt like the world has lost its mind, you're not imagining it. The most damaging part of political cult culture isn't what it does to elections. It's what it does to everyday life. It shows up at family dinners, in friendships that quietly fade, in workplaces where people stop speaking honestly. Politics used to be something you discussed. Now it's something people are. And when identity enters the room, connection quietly leaves. People don't just disagree anymore. They distance. They pre-screen relationships. They avoid certain conversations. They cut off people they once loved. Not because those people are dangerous, but because disagreement now feels unsafe. What's lost in this process is the sense of shared humanity, the ability to sit with someone who sees the world differently without needing to defeat them. Political cult culture teaches us that coexistence is weakness, that listening is endorsement, that curiosity is betrayal. So people retreat into their tribes. They build smaller and smaller circles where they never have to feel challenged. And over time, those circles become echo chambers, not just online, but in real life. This affects how people date, how families function, how communities form. It creates a quiet loneliness, even when you're surrounded by people who agree with you. Because agreement isn't connection. Connection requires the ability to hold difference without turning it into threat. And when politics becomes a cult, difference stops being something we navigate. It becomes something we fear. That's the cost most people never talk about. Not just division on a screen, but fragmentation in everyday human life. There's one more consequence of political cult culture that's uncomfortable to talk about, but necessary. When belief systems stop seeing opposition as human, escalation becomes easier. History shows that violence rarely starts with weapons. It starts with language. There's a pattern that shows up again and again in the history of cults. They don't begin with violence. They begin with ideas, with speeches, with protests, with slogans, with a shared sense of injustice. At first, everything feels peaceful. People are just talking, just organizing, just expressing themselves. That's how most cults start. But over time, something shifts. The group stops being about what it believes and starts being about who belongs. Dissent becomes suspicion. Questions become disloyalty. Outsiders become threats. Once that line is crossed, escalation becomes almost inevitable. Not because most people want violence, but because the system no longer rewards restraint. History shows that cults rarely end quietly. Some end with forced loyalty tests. Some end with public shaming. Some end with coercion. Some end with people being asked to sacrifice their values, their autonomy, or their lives. Sometimes the harm comes from inside the group. Sometimes it comes from outside, from clashes, crackdowns, or retaliation. But one thing remains consistent. When belief becomes absolute and obedience becomes moral, someone eventually gets hurt. The phrase "drink the Kool-Aid" didn't come from nowhere. It became shorthand for what happens when people are pushed past independent thought and into total submission. Political cult culture doesn't start with violence. It starts with moral certainty, with the belief that the cause is so important that normal rules no longer apply. And when enough people believe that, even if most never act on it, the conditions are created for someone, somewhere, to take things too far. So what do? We slow down. We learn to spot the signs, when your side can do no wrong, when doubt feels like betrayal, when anger feels like intelligence, when humiliation feels like truth. We practice one radical skill: thinking without performing. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you for being here. I hope this video gave you something to think about, whether that's a new perspective, a new question, or just a moment to slow down. That's really what this channel is about. There's a lot more coming, and I'm looking forward to sharing it with you. This is Think Peace Universe, a new space for thought.